The snow outside the window of 14 Cresthallow Drive was the clean, unbothered kind. The kind that hadn't been touched yet, that still looked like something worth keeping. I remember noticing it through the dining room glass while my father's voice filled the room behind me. 61 degrees in that house, the thermostat locked at my stepmother Renata's preferred setting, and I could see my grandfather Theodore's breath, just barely, just a thin ghost of vapor, as he sat in the chair they'd put him in, the folding one from the garage, not the upholstered ones everyone else had. His hands were resting on his knees. The plate in front of him was empty because no one had offered him anything yet. He had been there for 40 minutes. He was 83 years old. He had built the table they were eating off of. And that's when my stepbrother Callum said the thing he said. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories New. I'm going to tell you what happened next and what happened 2 years after that. If you believe that patience and paperwork can dismantle cruelty more completely than any argument ever could, subscribe now. Stay with me. My name is Vesna. I'm a licensed civil engineer. At the time this story begins, I was 31 years old, living in a rented studio in Millhaven with a drafting table, a second-hand couch, and $14,200 in a savings account I'd built by working 60-hour weeks and eating most of my lunches at my desk. I had no partner, no dependents, and no debt. I had done this deliberately, methodically, the way I do most things. My father called it stubbornness. My stepmother Renata called it not knowing how to ask for help. What it actually was preparation, though I didn't know what for yet. Theodore was my mother's father. When my mother died, I was 9, she was 34, it was a January, and the roads were bad. Theodore became the person who raised me on weekends, summers, and every school break while my father remarried and reorganized his life around a woman who had 2 sons of her own. Theodore was a cabinet maker. He had the hands for it. Wide palms, blunt fingers, the kind of patience that makes beautiful things. He taught me to read a level, to identify wood grain, to follow a blueprint. He taught me that a thing worth building is worth building slowly. My father's family called him your grandfather, the way you'd say your old car. Technically yours, technically a relationship, but not something they were going to get attached to. I visited Theodore every Thursday. We ate together every Thursday. He always made something with his hands when I arrived, not as a gesture, just because that was how he was made. The invitation came in early November. A phone call from my father, Dragan, in that particular voice he used when he wanted something, the one that sounded like generosity but had conditions built into the foundation. Christmas. The whole family. The house on Cresthallow Drive. Renata was cooking. The boys would be there. Callum and his wife, Peter and his girlfriend. There was a guest room. I was welcome to bring Theodore. He said the last sentence quickly, like something he'd been asked to include. I almost said no. I want to be honest about that. I almost found a reason because I knew the shape of those dinners, knew how they went when Theodore was present and not present, knew the specific silence that fell when he walked into a room full of Dragan's family. But Theodore had asked me once quietly if we could go back there together sometime. Before I'm too old to travel. He'd said it without self-pity, matter-of-factly, the way he talked about everything. He was 83. I called my father back and said yes. The conditions came in a follow-up text from Renata. Dinner at 4, please don't bring wine, we have plenty, and if Theodore needs anything special he should let me know in advance. The irony of that text, if he needs anything special, would come back to me later. It already had a fold in it. I just hadn't opened it yet. I drove to Theodore's apartment the week before Christmas to tell him. He was at his workbench, sanding something small and square that I didn't ask about yet. He looked up and his expression did something careful and private. Good, he said. That was all. We arrived at 3:47 on Christmas Day. Theodore wore his good wool sweater, dark green, no holes, the one he kept folded in the top drawer. I had made sure his coat was brushed. The house smelled like roasting meat and something synthetic and floral that I assumed was a candle. Renata greeted us at the door with the performance of warmth, both hands on my arms, a smile that moved her mouth but not the rest of her face. She hugged Theodore in the way people hug someone they're afraid might leave traces. Callum and Peter nodded from the couch. Their wives and girlfriends studied their phones. They put Theodore in the folding chair from the garage. I noticed this from the kitchen doorway, Where I'd gone to offer help, that wasn't accepted. I came back into the dining room and saw it. The upholstered chairs pulled close to the table, the folding aluminum chair set slightly apart, its legs uneven on the hardwood floor so that Theodore would have to hold himself at a slight angle to sit in it steadily. I watched him look at the chair. I watched him look at the table. He had made that table. Walnut, 3 inches thick, hand-planed. He'd made it as a wedding gift for my father and his first wife for my mother in 1988. 35 years old, and it was still the most beautiful piece of furniture in the house. He sat down in the folding chair without comment. He rested his hands on his knees. Dinner was served. Not to Theodore, not at first. The plates moved around the table with the efficiency of a family that had done this many times before, and Theodore's spot was simply not included in the circuit. I picked up the serving bowl myself. I put food on his plate. He touched my arm once lightly. He didn't say thank you because between us that word was understood and didn't need saying. Then Callum made his comment. It was about the chair. Specifically about how Theodore should be comfortable in it. At his age. Specifically about how old people don't really notice these things. Said to Peter, not to Theodore, but in the full register of a voice that intended to be heard. Theodore's hands went still on his fork. I put down my napkin. I said, clearly and without raising my voice, that we would need a different chair for my grandfather, and that I'd appreciate someone getting one from the upstairs bedroom. Renata said that the chair was perfectly fine. I said it was not. Dragan said, and this I will always remember exactly. Vesna, this is not the time or place for one of your campaigns. There it was. The word campaigns. The thing I'd been filed under in this family for years. I looked at my father. I thought about how long he had known Theodore, how many years Theodore had been the person who raised his daughter while he built a new life. I watched something move across his face. Not shame, not yet, but the shape of shame's waiting room. I stood up. I asked Theodore if he wanted to leave. He looked at the table. He put one hand flat on its surface, on the walnut he had planed and joined and finished himself. Yes, he said. I think so. We walked out together. I chose this. I want to be precise about that. I chose it knowing what it meant, knowing what it would cost, and I would choose it again tomorrow. Not one person at that table moved. Peter's girlfriend watched us go with her fork suspended halfway between her plate and her mouth. She almost said something. I could see it. She set her fork down instead. I don't blame her. I only mention it so you know someone in that room had a conscience. Theodore moved in with me on December 26th. My studio was 480 square feet. We rearranged it with the precision of a geometry problem. His bed behind a bookshelf I turned perpendicular to the wall, my drafting table pushed into the alcove. I gave him the closet. I bought a second lamp. I paid an additional $200 a month for the larger parking space, so I could keep his few boxes of tools somewhere dry. These were not hardships. I want to be clear about that. These were logistics. I solved them. He couldn't pay rent. He was on a fixed income, $1,140 a month in pension, and his expenses totaled $870 before I covered the gap. I didn't write any of this down as a debt. It wasn't a debt. It was what the situation required. We ate dinner together every night. He cooked on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. He made a potato soup with dill that I had eaten my entire life and could still not entirely replicate. The difference, he told me, was that he added the dill at 2 separate points in the process, not just at the end. I wrote that down in a notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer. In January, my father called. He said that Renata was upset. He said that my behavior on Christmas had been hurtful to the family. He said that if I apologized, we could put this behind us. I told him I wasn't going to apologize. He said that Theodore was not his responsibility. I told him I understood that completely. The call lasted 4 minutes. In March, Callum texted to say there was a care facility in Branton, very well regarded, sliding scale fees, and that the family had discussed it and felt it would be best for everyone. I read the text twice. I put my phone face down on the drafting table and went back to the load calculation I was working on. I never responded. That was the last contact for 7 months. It was during this time that Theodore started working again. Small things at first, A repair on a neighbor's chair. A simple box with a fitted lid that a woman down the hall had asked him to make for her sewing notions. Then slowly more. He set up a small workbench in the parking space beside my car. He worked 2, sometimes 3 hours a day when his hands were good. I would come home in the evenings and there would be sawdust on the concrete and something new taking shape, and Theodore would be at the small folding table I'd bought him. Not the garage kind, a real one, eating whatever he'd made for dinner and reading. There was a box on his workbench that he'd brought from his apartment, wooden about the size of a shoebox with a brass latch. He kept it locked. He moved it from the workbench to his bedside and back again. He never explained it and I never asked. I noticed it the first week. I noticed it again in April when I found him sitting with it on his lap. Not opening it, just holding it. I noticed it a third time in October, when I came home to find it sitting on the kitchen table with a sealed envelope on top of it, and Theodore eating his soup at the counter with his back to both of them. If you've been watching this story unfold and you're wondering whether it matters, whether any of this ends somewhere that makes the folding chair and the 4-minute phone call and the text about the care facility mean something, subscribe now so the rest of the story finds you. Theodore died on November 14th. He went quietly in his sleep, in the bed behind the bookshelf. I found him in the morning. His hands were folded. The room was cold because he had always slept with the window cracked, even in November, a habit I had stopped trying to change. I sat with him for a long time before I called anyone. I called the hospice nurse first. Then I called his doctor. Then I sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug of coffee that went cold, and I looked at the box on the counter where I'd placed it, and the envelope on top of it, and I thought about the dill, added twice, not once, and I did not cry yet because the practical things needed doing and I was the only person to do them. The funeral was small. I arranged it. I paid for it, $4,200, a dignified service at a chapel he had once helped repair some pews in 40 years ago. 3 people from his old workshop came. The woman from down the hall brought flowers. My father did not come. He sent a card. The envelope on top of the box was addressed to a law firm in the city, Baranowski and Holt. I did not open it. I delivered it to the address on the front in person 2 weeks after the funeral, on a Tuesday morning in December, almost exactly 1 year after Christmas on Crest Hallow Drive. The meeting was scheduled for January 7th. I received the notification by certified mail. The letter addressed to me requested my presence regarding the estate of Theodore Merrick Bledek. It listed the other parties who would be present: my father Dragan, Renata, Callum, and Peter. I arrived first. I sat in a chair across from a long table and I put the wooden box, which the firm had asked me to bring, on the table in front of me. My father arrived with Renata. He looked at me and then at the box and his expression was a question he didn't ask. Callum came with his wife. Peter came alone. They filled the chairs. The lawyer, a quiet man named Baranowski, distributed folders. The estate of Theodore Merrick Bledek, he explained, had been revised by new will in February. 2 months after Christmas, 6 weeks after Theodore moved into my studio. The house Theodore had owned outright in the village of Lisjak in Croatia, where he had been born and where his family had farmed for 3 generations, assessed value €740,000, had been left entirely to me. The woodworking tools inventory and the small remaining savings account $31,400 had been left entirely to me. Everything else, which was to say nothing, had been left to the rest of the family. Renata's chair scraped back. Dragan said, "That's not possible." He said it twice. Callum leaned forward and said that Theodore couldn't have been of sound mind, that he'd been old and influenced, that there would need to be a challenge. His wife put her hand on his arm. He moved his arm away. Peter said nothing. He was looking at the box. His face was doing something I recognized, the look of a person who is realizing that they had a choice and made the wrong one and can now see exactly where and when it happened. Baranowski opened the box with a key from a small envelope. Inside, the original deed to the Lisjak property, a copy of the new will, and a letter in Theodore's handwriting, addressed not to me but to all of us. I had not read it. I didn't know what it said. Baranowski read it aloud. It was short. It said that he had spent his life building things meant to last, that a table was only as good as the hands that cared for it, that he understood some things couldn't be fixed, that he had one grandchild who visited him every Thursday without being asked, who put food on his plate when no one else would, who gave him a place to work and a place to die with some dignity. He said, "A thing worth building is worth building slowly." Vesna understood this. I hope eventually the rest of you will too. I let the room be quiet for a moment. Then I said, "He told me that once about a cabinet." I didn't know he meant everything else too. My father looked at the walnut table, not the one on Cresthallow Drive, but the one in his memory, the one Theodore had planed by hand. I watched him understand something. His hands went very still. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be precise about this as well. What I felt was the specific weight of a thing that had been true for a long time finally becoming visible. I met with Baranowski privately the following week. I told him I was prepared to offer a settlement. A modest sum, $15,000, drawn from Theodore's savings, to be divided between Dragan and the others, in exchange for a signed agreement to contest nothing and to release all claims. My father refused. He said it was an insult. He said I was doing this to punish him. I told him I understood that's what it felt like, and that the offer would remain open for 30 days. He did not take it. The will stood without challenge. The challenge Callum had mentioned, there would need to be a challenge, required evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. Theodore had been examined by his physician in January and certified as fully competent. Baranowski had 2 witnesses to the signing. The challenge went nowhere. The property in Listjak is mine. I have not sold it. I visited it in the spring. A stone farmhouse, small, with a workshop attached that still had the smell of sawdust baked into the walls. The neighbors knew Theodore's name. They offered me coffee and spoke about him in a way that told me exactly what kind of man he was in the place where he was from. I am learning Croatian. I am doing this slowly the way I do most things. I practice on Thursday evenings at the kitchen table in my apartment, a real apartment now, 2 rooms, a window that faces east. I make the potato soup with dill. I add it twice. Once near the beginning, once at the end. I wrote it down in the notebook, but I don't need the notebook anymore. The soup tastes almost exactly right. Every week it gets a little closer. That's how I know the inheritance wasn't the property or the money or the deed in the locked box. It was the recipe. It was the Thursday evenings. It was the understanding that a thing worth building is worth building slowly. Theodore understood this. And now so do I. If this story stayed with you, if you know someone sitting in the folding chair right now, in whatever form that takes, call them today. Not tomorrow. Today. Tell them you see them. That's all. That's enough. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about the person in your life who deserved better and got it anyway. And subscribe so you're here when the next story comes. I'll see you in the next one.